My name is Mark, a recording angel. I've been observing this earth since the dawn of creation. The Most High has asked me to share my recordings with you. The following are my records of the history of God's true church, down through centuries of oppression, and onward until the promised earth is made new once more, collected in this book, War of the Invisibles, the amazing story of the great controversy. If today's recording contains situations which might be uncomfortable for younger listeners, I will mark the video with the words parental guidance recommended.
Chapter 9, Part 3, Rachel, Oswego, New York, Fall 1849. "I'm glad I got to come with you again, Papa," Rachel said. "It's been a long time since our last trip." "Yes," Papa said, laughing. "You are 15 now, and let's hope you've learned a few more manners and are a little more tactful than that time I took you to see the Bates family." Rachel laughed. "I'm sorry I embarrassed you," she said. "It's just that everything was so interesting, and I had so many questions." "I know," Papa said, "and I've always been proud of you, even when you're a little tactless." "Well, I will be the absolute epitome of tactfulness and good manners this time," Rachel promised. "You can count on me." "Well, good," Papa replied. "I am counting on you, and I'm glad that your mama agreed to let you come with me. You're growing up so fast. Pretty soon you're going to be leaving home and won't be able to go places with me anymore. We'll look back and remember these good times together." Rachel smiled. "I'm really excited about seeing Elder and Mrs. White again. I've seen them a few times when they've come through Washington on their trips to visit the other Sabbath keepers. I don't know if they'll remember me or not, but I sure remember them." "Well, I imagine they haven't forgotten you," Papa said. "Well," Rachel predicted, "they may not have forgotten you. Not all of the stories that you put in the paper have been particularly complimentary." "Well," said Papa, "newspapers have to be objective. They can't get caught up in all this religious stuff." Rachel looked at her shoes. "I knew that she prayed for her papa every night, and I knew that the Almighty had sent His Spirit to work on his heart. It's a pretty powerful force to resist, although the Mighty One has always allowed humans to have a free choice in this matter." "So, Papa, tell me what's happening on this trip. What are you going to check out?" "Well," Papa said, "at the paper we heard that there's a little trouble here in Oswego. You know that James and Ellen White have moved here to start their little publishing venture?" "Yes," Rachel agreed. "Their first paper came out in July. It's called The Present Truth." "Yes, I know," Papa continued. "I saw it too, but some of the other church people here in Oswego are unhappy with the things they're teaching, particularly their Sabbath message. These people are going to hold a religious revival and are trying to convince the people that the Sabbath is not important as long as they turn away from their sins and give their hearts to God." "Oh," Rachel said. "Well, turning away from your sins and giving your heart to God is important. That would be the first step, but once you give your heart to God, you love Him that much you want to please Him. He told us, 'If you love me, you'll keep my commandments.' He said that in the Bible, in John." "Yes, I know," Papa said. "I'm just telling you what's going on here in Oswego and what I'm coming to report on. The religious revival has been going on for about a month, and right now it looks like town opinion is swaying toward the Methodist leaders. However, we're going to be staying with a friend of mine named Mr. Patch. He hasn't made up his mind yet, and he told me a most interesting story." "You talked to Mr. Patch already?" asked Rachel. "No," said Papa. "He wrote me a letter. He and I are friends from way back. Apparently Ellen White told Mr. Patch, 'Just wait for a month, and you will be shown the character of the people engaged in this revival who profess to have such a great burden for sinners.' Mr. Patch knows who the leader is and whom she was talking about. He says that Mrs. White was given a vision, and she knows something that she's not going to tell, but he will find out. It's been about a month, and I thought we would come and visit Mr. Patch and see if we could learn what this big secret is." "Sounds like it would make a good story," Rachel said, "if there's anything we can actually find out, or if Mrs. White decides to tell." Mr. Patch was delighted to see them. "I'm so glad you brought Rachel," he said, and turning to her he added, "I haven't seen you since you were a little tyke." Rachel wrinkled her nose. She hated to be told how much she had grown. "Well, come on in and have a seat. Get comfortable," he invited them. "I'll have your bags brought in a few minutes. Do you have any questions you want to ask? I know you're full of them." "Sure," Papa said. How are James and Ellen White viewed in town here?"
I guess it depends who's viewing them, Mr. Patch replied. James seems to be pretty well respected. Apparently, last fall he was still trying to raise money for food and supplies for their publishing venture. He took a job in the harvest field cutting grain.
James White cutting grain? Papa queried.
He looks a little, well, feeble for that, Mr. Patch asked.
Well, I was looking for a kinder word than that, Papa said, but yes.
It's true, Mr. Patch continued. He has not always been in good health, and apparently he had an ankle injury working in a sawmill when he was younger that crippled his left foot for years.
Yes, Papa said, he still has a bit of a limp.
Well, the other farmhands don't have much use for preachers and such, and they weren't real excited about his doing the harvesting with them. James himself wasn't sure he could do that type of hard field work. They decided to put him at the head of the grain cutting team.
What would that do? Rachel asked.
Well, they follow each other in a diagonal line. Each one cuts a swath, and the next one behind him cuts his swath where the first man's strip began and goes across. The man at the head has the hardest job. He has to keep ahead of all the others and set the pace. They were hoping to run him down and drive him off the field.
How mean! Rachel exclaimed.
Yes, I suppose, Mr. Patch said, but these are tough men. Anyway, apparently James cut a very wide swath and kept swinging his scythe just as fast as he could. The other men were taking narrower ones so they could go faster and keep as close to him as possible, hoping to run over him. Across the wide field they worked and worked, then they turned around and started back with James still ahead of them. Finally, the men threw down their scythes. They were furious. "You're trying to kill yourself and us too," they shouted. "We give up. We can't even keep up with you, and you did all that without even a beer."
Rachel laughed. James doesn't drink beer.
Apparently not, Mr. Patch said. When he walked onto that field, they were angry and determined to give him a hard time. Now he has the respect of the farmers and the hard-working men. However, the church people aren't as excited about him, and many people don't know what to make of his wife, who has these visions.
Right, Rachel agreed. She told you about a vision, didn't she?
Yes, Mr. Patch said. She says I'm going to find out something about the leadership of this revival.
Well, we'll go with you to the meeting, Rachel stated, because we want to find out too.
All right, Mr. Patch said. I don't really know what to think on this. I'm torn between the two. After her accident, when she was 9 years old, she was so ill and disabled that she wasn't even able to complete her education past 3rd grade. I understand that she has had headaches, eye inflammation, respiratory weaknesses, even perhaps tuberculosis. The doctor said that she had no hope and was going to experience an early death. She has heart trouble, too, and in December of 1844, when she had that first vision, she was wheelchair-bound at the Haynes' house. She couldn't even speak above a whisper.
Wow, Rachel exclaimed. I didn't realize she was so sick.
Yes, Mr. Patch continued, and she still is ill off and on. Yet, no matter how ill she is, when she stands up to speak, she speaks in a clear voice for up to 4 hours at a time once without looking tired. Even if she's pale as a ghost when she stands up, the color comes back into her face, and she seems to get her strength back. It's an amazing transformation from weakness to power. It has happened many times.
Sounds quite convincing, Papa said.
Well, it is, and when she has her vision, sometimes she doesn't even breathe. She doesn't move, and strong men can't move her arms from the position she's in. It's just amazing. Yet I'm still torn. I just don't know. I've been Methodist all my life, and I have a lot of respect for the men leading the revival right now. I don't know what to think.
Well, Papa said, we'll stay a few days and talk to a few people, and we'll even go to the meetings with you. What time is the meeting time tonight? Is there time for us to rest a little first and change our clothes?
Oh, sure, Mr. Patch answered. Let me show you your rooms.
That night, Rachel and her father attended the revival meetings with Mr. Patch and his fiancée. Mr. Mitchell, not his real name, the county treasurer, was one of the leaders at the revival. After the sermon, he prayed loud and long, agonizing over the sinners in the congregation. Suddenly, in the middle of the prayer, he grabbed his stomach and doubled up in terrible pain. "What's the matter?" Rachel whispered.
"I don't know," Mr. Patch said. "Let's get him some help."
Mr. Patch rushed to the front and with several other men carried Mr. Mitchell home. On the way, Mr. Mitchell started vomiting blood. "Well, nothing has happened," Papa remarked at breakfast a few days later. "I think I need to get back to Washington."
"Well," Mr. Patch said, "we did have the excitement over Mr. Mitchell."
Yes, Papa admitted, but that hardly constitutes an evil character being exposed. That's not the same thing as a broken blood vessel in a man's stomach, even if it was quite dramatic.
True, Mr. Patch agreed. You may want to wait one more day, though. I heard that those trying to do Mr. Mitchell's work at the courthouse have found that $1,000 is missing from county funds.
Really? Papa's ears perked up. That sounds like a news story.
The sheriff and his assistant are going over there this morning, but no one's supposed to know yet.
Well, I think I'll follow them, Papa said. He rushed out to go chat with the sheriff. Half an hour later, the sheriff went to the front door of the sick man's home and knocked. Papa and the sheriff's assistant stayed out in the yard. Suddenly, Papa noticed a movement on the other side of the house.
"Let's go check it out,"
he whispered to the assistant. One went around each side of the house. Mrs. Mitchell was sneaking out the back door carrying a bag. She rushed over to a snowbank and dug a hole, dropping the bag quickly into the pile and pushing snow over it. The sheriff's assistant grabbed her by the wrist and made her go back with him as he pulled the bag out of the snowbank. Then he and Papa went inside. They came into Mr. Mitchell's bedroom just in time to hear him saying, "I swear, as God is my witness, I didn't take any money from the county." The assistant held up the bag and asked, "Then what's this?" Sure enough, it contained the missing money.
"Well," Mr. Patch said, "aren't you glad you waited another day? Now you have the whole story."
"I guess I do," Papa said. "This is just amazing. How did Ellen White know?"
"I don't know," Mr. Patch said. "I think the Lord really does talk to her. At any rate, nobody thinks the Lord talks to Mr. Mitchell."
"I feel sad for Mr. Mitchell," Rachel remarked. "It must be awful to be recovering from a bleeding stomach and be put in jail, too."
"Yes," Mr. Patch agreed. "I imagine it is, but this whole thing has helped me make up my mind. I'm going to join the Sabbath-Keeping Advent group. How about you?"
"Well, Rachel already is one," Papa admitted, "and I think I'm going to have to join too." Rachel jumped up in delight and hugged her Papa. "Papa, I'm so glad," she whispered. "I've been praying about this for a long time."
"I know," said Papa, grinning. "I just can't hold out any longer."
Epilogue. The little band of Sabbath keepers grew rapidly into what is now known as the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Uriah invented a jointed prosthetic leg instead of the usual wooden peg legs available to amputees at that time. He became an Adventist, and so did his sister Annie. Both were poets and prolific writers. Uriah became editor of the Review and Herald, and Annie wrote many of the early Adventist hymns still enjoyed today. The Almighty continued to give messages through Ellen, while her husband James was gifted with organizational skills and served as the second president of the General Conference after the Seventh-day Adventists had formed their church organization in 1863. Through this group and others, such as the Seventh-day Baptists, the Sabbath message was spread all over the world. Other Millerites who accepted the Sabbath formed the Advent Christian Church. William Miller died in 1849, still waiting for Jesus to come. He never accepted the Sabbath.
This broadcast has come from the book War of the Invisibles by Sally Pierson Dillon, with permission from the Review and Herald Publishing Association. This book and the rest of the series, War of the Ages, can be purchased by going to www.adventistbookcenter.com or by calling 1-800-765-6955. I'm your narrator, Austin Backus, and this audio project is a gift to you from my free Christian book ministry, RXF 1888. Please visit our website, www.rxf1888.com, to request free Christian books for both kids and adults. And join us here again for more stories from Mark, the Recording Angel.